Welcome to Breakdown, the podcast series that breaks down all the latest crime and punishment news, but it does so with a twist. Okay, so we're going to have, I believe, an interesting conversation today. And as you can see, we have got a guest, someone that's quite personal to me. But rather than me introduce you, I'll hand it over to you and maybe you can introduce yourself.
Well, I'm Kai. I'm Andy's nephew. I've grown up with him all my life. And today you're getting more of a first-hand experience on the spaces of how things work. Like I'm not educated in Andy's field or anything, but what I've got is experience and the ability to navigate these spaces. And rather than have someone more educated than me tell you how stuff works, it's better coming from me because I know how it works.
Yeah, you certainly know. Well, the reason why I've asked you to come on today, because we already have had a bit of a kind of pre-conversation about this, but we wanted to kind of know, or at least I wanted to know, and I think sometimes we can get caught up, like you said, in my field. I can't believe you just said educated when you're talking about me, Kai, but forget that for now, right? So, but we can go off and drift into these elite educated spaces and stuff like that. And sometimes we forget what things are like on the shop floor. So I don't know, it might be helpful for you to talk a little bit about what your life has been like growing up a little bit in Leeds. Have you grown up in like affluent areas or
no,
what kind of areas?
Very deprived areas, very deprived.
Right. And what's the demographic in the areas that you've been growing up in?
Mainly coloured people. Like when I used to chill, I don't really chill that much in Beast anymore, but when I did, well, mainly just coloured people. Like there weren't many white people knocking about. Not many white people have the confidence to just step out the house and knock about in Beeston.
Right. So Beeston being an area in the south of Leeds, it's got a high demographic of non-white
people.
Yeah, non-white people, both black, mixed race, and particularly at high levels of Asians in that area. And now you live in Cottingley. I spend less time in Cottingley. So what's it like in Cottingley?
It's more secluded. Like, to be fair, like you still get your average things that you will get in Beeston, but it's just more secluded and it's more quiet.
Okay.
Less
so high levels of deprivation. Obviously, I've come down to your house quite a bit. There is high levels of deprivation in Cottingley as well. Beeston is certainly one of the most deprived areas in Leeds, and obviously you've only recently moved to Cottingley, haven't you? So you spent most of your time in
well,
Beeston.
Obviously, my mum had the first few houses in Airwells and Seacroft, and then I went to Beeston.
Yeah, you did move around a lot in the early times, and then. So, for example, what's going to be relevant for this podcast is what's the kind of crime rates, or what's your experience of crime in Beeston, for example?
Do you know what? With crime, it's more of a fail-safe. Do you know what I mean?
Explain what you mean by that.
You can't get a job, and you're struggling. So what do you do? Like when you can't do anything else, from my experience and the crowds that I've been in, you turn to crime when you've got nothing else going for you.
That's not the case for you, though, is it? You haven't, as far as I'm aware, unless you're going to release something to me now, you've never been involved in the criminal justice system. And what are you doing? What are you doing at the moment? What are you doing at the moment to keep yourself out of that kind of
Well, I'm training to be an electrical engineer. Do you know what I'm saying? But I've got boys, or necessarily, maybe not boys, who might turn to that when they can't get the opportunities that I've been given.
You did mention that to me a while ago. We'll dip into that in a minute. So the point of the podcast, so welcome, Kai, and thank you for coming on and sharing your wisdom and expertise. But you will see on the screen here now that the kind of one of the things that I noticed that was going on, I seen it flying around on X. It's a campaign around hate crime. So as you can see on the screen there, so this is in Scotland, so it's not that south of the border, but I still think it's important to cover this kind of stuff, is that they're talking about the hate monster. So the hate monster represents that feeling some people get when they are frustrated and angry and take it out on others because they feel like they need to show that they are better than them. So obviously the idea is that you commit a crime because you think that you're better than other people. The hate monster loves it when you get angry. And the critical part for this conversation is, so why do some people, according to the Scottish Please campaign. Why do some people let the hate monster in? And I think this is aimed at younger people. So I think the intent is well intended, but I do have a worry about the message that comes through on this. So we know that young men aged between 18 and 30 are most likely to commit hate crime, particularly those from socially excluded communities who are heavily influenced by their peers. Fair enough. We know that particularly men between ages of 18 and 30 are most likely, well, it's actually drops most likely to be involved in crime overall. And they may have deep-rooted feelings of being socially excluded and economically disadvantaged, combined with ideas of white male privilege. Now, just hold your thought there for me, please, a minute, Kai, before you come in. Now, the reason why I wanted to talk about it is because I have a view on that, but also, as you can see on the screen here, Dr. Rachel Brady retweeted this on X and put the statement that young white socially excluded men experiencing economic deprivation, have difficult childhoods, living with drug addiction, joblessness, singled out by the police as letting the hate monster in. Police interpreting anger, frustration, legitimate resentment, probably towards the system itself, as hate. And then last but not least, you will see that Dr. Lisa Mckenzie also retweeted with her view, which is that poor white working class boys and men likely to have a hate monster because of their white male entitlement, nothing to do with poverty or hopelessness. Poor white working class boys and men think they are shite, not entitled. Entitlement belongs somewhere else, not here. So before we go into the kind of next part of the podcast, Kai, as a young mixed race, Black Caribbean, your dad is as well, and then you're and a white mum, and growing up in these deprived, highly diverse areas, I'm interested in what your interpretation of that kind of campaign and that school of thought is really.
Do you know what it is? I think there's no such thing as entitlement where I've come from. No such thing. Does not matter if you're white, black, or Asian. You don't think you're entitled at all. Do you know what I mean? Like, you're not entitled. Like, and I'd say with the sort of people I've been in with, maybe the white people at times got it the worst.
Why? What do you mean by that?
Like, in the way of when you look at these things and you think bullying and them sort of demographics, I'd say sometimes the white boys got it the worst.
Right, interesting. So in a kind of highly diverse population where you've got, like you said, in Beeston, for example,
the white people are the minority.
The white people are the minority, but also how does that play out? Because of just with the widest numbers, we know that if you're black or Asian, you're more likely to come into contact with the criminal justice system, particularly Black Caribbean boys, more likely to come into contact with the youth justice system and the significantly disproportionate incarceration. So that's where all this thinking comes from in terms of looking at the country as a whole, that there are some systemic issues in society that disadvantage certain demographics, i.e. not being white.
Yeah.
But what I'm interested in what you've said there is, in the particular context in which you're living, that some of the white groups or males that you are in there with, actually you don't see them as self-entitled or as privileged. And actually what you said was actually they're more likely to be bullied.
Yeah.
Okay.
With the groups I've been with, yeah, like I've mixed in plenty of different groups and we've got along fine. Like when I'm chilling with white people, especially white people, because they're on about white privilege. Like when I'm chilling with like white people, do you know what we've all got in common? We're all skint. We're all living in Beeston. Do you know what I'm saying? There's no such thing as self-entitlement. Like we all live in terraced houses in Beeston. So you think when I'm chilling with them sort of people, they're going to be like, well, I'm white and I've got privilege. Like I'm better than you. That's not how it works at all. We all know like we might have credit where we go, but it don't mean we've got money. That's something we all relate over.
Yeah. So you're saying that it feels like there's a more commonality, and that commonality is class, that commonality is being socially excluded. And I must admit that when I work in higher education, I hear a lot of this stuff that comes down from privileged spaces. So I agree with you that, and that's my worry. I'm reading a book at the moment by Rob Henderson, and he's coined this term called luxury beliefs, and he defines it that it's a luxury belief that the privileged has that has consequences for the less privileged. And I think this could be one, because what white privilege or white entitlement looks like in higher education, by the time it's trickled down into socioeconomic disadvantage, my worry is this is how it plays out in practice. Because just out of interest then, what I wanted to do is I wanted to jump onto some statistics, because I was thinking about that, why male entitlement. I was thinking about, as you know, your Uncle Andi wasn't always in this position and spent 4 years in custody. And I was thinking, so my time in custody, exactly like you're saying there, was I around a load of white male self-entitled people? And more to the point, were the people that were not white, were they humble and courteous and different in a distinct transformational way? I don't think so. I think that you either think that we're all in prison because we're all disadvantaged, or you think we're all entitled because actually most of us committed crimes mainly based on the fact that we think we could take something from somebody else for whatever reason. The fact that you differentiate those groups out by race and ethnicity
doesn't matter. It's something totally irrelevant. It does not matter what colour you are. When you're dipping into things like crime and them sort of spaces, it don't matter what colour you are, you're all doing it for the same reason.
Well, that's interesting. So I think that a lot of people, especially in my spaces, would disagree with that. But let's just jump on, right, Kai, because I wanted to cover, thinking about my experiences of custody, I wanted to just look at the data from HMPPS, which you can see on the screen, and the Ministry of Justice, and their safety in custody statistics. So I wanted to know what actually, okay, not everybody in prison is there for hate crime. In fact, most people are, but certainly everybody's there because they've committed a crime, right? So they would fit into this. So the self-entitled white males would be disproportionately in prison, right? So I wanted to look at what the statistics say about that. So if we then look at self-harm, for example, and suicide attempts in prison, what you can see now on the screen is that in terms of self-harm, measured per 1,000 prisoners, white prisoners were the highest rates of self-harm and attempted suicide, right? So you can see on the screen there that there were 845 per 1,000 prisoners, and they were followed by mixed ethnic groups, and the rates were lowest for black prisoners and Asian prisoners. So again, I'm not saying that tells us anything specifically, but all these self-entitled white males that go to prison and commit crimes that are often aggressive crimes end up in prison and that have the highest rates of self-harm. So that's at least interesting. And again, when they said the ages were between 18 and 30. So again, I wanted to look at age rate that we're talking about. So the highest rates of self-harm were actually, the highest rates were between 18 and 20. And the groups at the time of in male establishments, the highest rates was those aged between 25 and 29. So bang smack in the middle of the ethnicity that these guys are saying are self-entitled, and the age that they're saying that these guys are self-entitled. And then so you might think, well, they might be committing suicide, or they might be attempting to self-harm because they're self-entitled and don't deserve to be in prison. Well, if you're thinking that, just have a little rethink, because the highest rate of self-harm is in female establishments. So women are the highest rates to self-harm, and I'm sure they're not doing it because they're entitled and don't believe that they should be in prison. So again, those statistics are interesting. So then I wanted to just have a quick look at ethnicity and violence in the prison population. And what you find is prisoners from black and mixed ethnic groups had the highest rates of assailants. So assailants were described as, this refers to assaults, incidents in which there is a clear aggressor, assailant and victim. Such incidents arise from offences of GBH, and ABH. And a fighter refers to the assault incidents in which there is no clear aggressor or victim. So if we look at that in terms of ethnicity, for black prisoners, there was 356 assailants per 1,000 incidents, right? And actually, if you go to the bottom there, you can see that the rates for white prisoners were lower than any other ethnic group. So again, I'm not purporting that tells us a great deal. But what it does tell us is that white prisoners are actually the most vulnerable and the most at risk of self-harm and the least likely to get involved in violence. So I just think we need to be careful that we don't purport this narrative that white males that are living in deprivation are out there self-entitled and assuming that they're better than other people. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Like, sometimes the non-coloured or white people, they get it the roughest because they're the minority, especially in places like prison, in them spaces where you've got a lot of people who are grouped up. And if you go in them spaces as a single white man, you're going to have problems, and it's just a fact. It's a known fact. And you'd know firsthand because you've been in them spaces.
Well, my view on that would be that, again, those statistics, I don't know what they actually. You need to be careful.
What do the statistics represent? They're not representing nothing, because I know and you know about the first-hand experiences, and them statistics, they're not adding up.
Yeah. Well, what I would say is, from my anecdotal experiences, that those statistics might tell us something about the individuals that are self-harming, but their ethnicity is probably the least thing that I would elevate. That actually, I think most people that self-harm in custody, from my experience, are people that are not prepared. So they haven't had a life that's prepared them for custody. You could have a broader conversation about why aren't non-white people more prepared for prison? And I think that that's because they're more likely to be in the spaces that you've grown up in, that I've grown up in, right? So I do think it plays a role, but I'm worried that the narratives that we're putting out there is that we're dividing groups in poverty, and I think it's a political reason, because if you create disharmony, you create the kind of power by numbers of poor people being able to say, no, this is not good enough. So actually, I would encourage that hate, not towards other groups that are in poverty with you, but actually that hate should manifest in the system that's making people deprived, white, black, Muslim, and anybody in between. Because actually, you should be bloody angry that you're in poverty. You should be angry that you're socioeconomically.
Everyone's angry. That's why we all get along. That's why we all group together. Like, and I don't, like, especially someone like me who's been in multiple groups of people, regardless of colour. We're all angry. Like, we are very angry people. But end of the day, it depends how you use that anger. That matters. Some people use it as fuel to go try do something better and have a career, and some don't. Some let it take over them, and they go down the wrong path.
Well, I suppose it brings us to a nice conclusion there. But I suppose from mine and your positions, we're kind of saying, stop trying to kind of divide us. There's more that brings us together as collaborative. And actually, these narratives are coming from people in positions of privilege, not the narratives from people. Like no, I agree with you.
Jobs and saying these things. They've gone to uni. The mum and dad have got door. Like, they haven't grown up in the spaces to be able to have the knowledge. Like, sometimes knowledge comes from experience. Don't matter what you read out of a book. What you read out of a book and study about, like, that's got naught to do with anything. Unless you've got first-hand experience, I don't want to know what comments you've got on it.
Well, you're not on your own on that, because my time in jail, I would say 95% of us in prison would have probably said something similar. But I just wanted to say, look, Kai, thanks for coming on. It was lovely to have the conversation. This can be quite sensitive, so I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your lived experience and your knowledge and your expertise, of which you've got many. And I'm really glad that you haven't let the circumstances and situation beat you down, and that you're on your Sparky course and going in the right direction for that. Okay, so guys, if you could, as ever, like the podcast that we've done today, and if you could subscribe, that would be amazing. And both me and Kai wanted to say thank you very much for listening. Hope you enjoyed the conversation.